As a reminder, to avoid any background noise or distractions, we ask that you mute your phone unless you, of course, have a question or comment. Also, feel free to use the chat function to ask questions or add comments if you've logged on to the web portion of the program. I also remind everyone that we are awarding a one hour of CE for this program, so we do ask that you listen to the program in its entirety. So today, as you all know, we're going to be discussing grit. And by the end of this program, participants will be able to calculate their grit score if you haven't done so already, which I hope you did. And you would have done this by completing a brief online quiz. And we're going to discuss those grit traits associated with this, which include courage, conscientiousness, endurance, resilience, and excellence. And this is all associated with our long-term goals as well as the follow-through. In addition, we're going to be able to connect these traits to grit and the impact that they can have on the long-term goals as well as our overall perseverance. And we'll be able to identify ways to develop and how to apply these traits to our professional lives. However, before we dig in a little deeper, what I'm going to present to you is the actual TED Talk. This was given by Angela Lee Duckworth. And she really revived this term grit in just the recent years. Ms. Duckworth used to have a very demanding consulting job, but she left it to go teach math in New York public schools. She no longer teaches in the traditional sense, but is now the CEO and founder of a character lab that focuses on research to do with character development. So while I get this queued up, I want everyone just to take a moment, and I'd like you to think about one of your long-term goals. Maybe it's one you've had for a while and you're still working on it. Maybe it's a long-term goal that you've recently set for yourself. Whatever it is, be it promotion, a raise, a degree, or perhaps another type of certification, I really want you to keep that one goal in mind as we listen to the video and as we discuss grit and the characteristics and how they relate to your long-term goal. So bear with me just a moment. And here we go. This video is about 5 minutes long, okay? For a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I was teaching 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not possible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily. So I left science. I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end
going to earn the most money? In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Charles West, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
Okay. So now you've got a little bit more background about grit itself. Let's get back to our program here. Give me one moment. And the context, as grit was described by Miss Duckworth, even though she does refer to grit in kids, as we just learned, grit is passion, it's perseverance for long-term goals. And in this, what really caught my attention, she says, and I really love how she put this, grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week and not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. However, Duckworth herself, she'll be the first to say in many articles and interviews that I did read while preparing for this program, that the essence of grit remains elusive. So today when we discuss grit, keep this in mind. You can't always pinpoint grit, and you may also find many of the traits are similar in nature and often intertwined. And like many personality traits can be, they tend to be thought of subjectively. So what we talk about grit is not always going to be obvious and in your face. So just keep an open mind as we're discussing grit, as well as how we can apply it to our lives and our long-term goals that we thought of prior to the video. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, grit is also defined as firmness of mind or spirit or unyielding courage in the face of hardship or danger. Either way you slice it or dice it, whether it's a definition by Merriam-Webster or Miss Duckworth's definition, both can be applied to us as adults and help accomplish our goals if we're gritty enough. So by this time, those of you that had registered ahead of time, I did send out a link for the grit test. So you should have taken that prior to the call. It only took a minute. And you should have gotten your calculated score based on that evaluation. And I'm sure these scores vary person to person. I'm going to put myself out there, and here's mine. So for those of you that are just on the phone, I did get a 3.5 score. And it says that I've scored a little higher than 40% of the adults in the U.S. Now, what does that really mean? Well, again, grit really remains elusive. And I don't want anyone to think of their own score as being classified as good or bad, because we can likely attribute the score to various reasons. Perhaps you haven't developed a long-term goal, or maybe you recently achieved one of your goals, so you really don't know where to go from there. Often our perseverance may depend on what the goal is. Is it something we're passionate about, or is it something that just really needs to get done? Miss Duckworth believes that if we're gritty about one thing, doesn't necessarily mean we'll be gritty or have more grit about something else. So your score may have depended on what frame of mind you were in, or perhaps the goals or projects you were thinking of while taking the quiz. That being said, don't read too much into your score as good or bad. Instead, the grit scale should be used as a self-reflection tool. And hopefully it prompts you to think about your future and the goals that you have set for yourself. So now we understand more about our score, let's go ahead and discuss the traits of grit. First, courage. Courage can be measured in different ways depending on when it's needed or when it's tested. You may need a little or you may need a lot. For example, you may need to work up your courage to introduce yourself to new members or perhaps network with new members that you don't know or haven't met before. Maybe you need courage to speak in front of a crowd. I certainly do. Even though we're not face-to-face, I do need to dig a little deeper before chapter chat and find that courage to come out here and speak, especially when I don't always get feedback. So that's somewhere where I can kind of dig courage. And I use that, you know, when I'm also doing presentations for our chapter leaders. So it's not something that I use often, but I do find that it has become a little bit easier the more that I do it. And when we're talking about courage really related to grit, we're talking about the kind of courage it takes to manage failure or the fear of failure. If you fail, which I think we can all admit that we've done before, no matter how big or small that failure is, it's about how we manage to deal with that failure. Do we pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off and keep going? Or do we wallow in it and throw ourselves a pity party? The extremely gritty are not afraid of failure, or at least don't give it much thought, and for the most part aren't really afraid to face it. They're willing to go after their goals no matter what happens on the path to getting there. In fact, they look at failure as a learning opportunity, and they take that experience and they grow from it. While for others it may hinder their ability to move forward at all, prolonging their future achievements, if not entirely dismantling their motivation and perseverance, their fear can manifest itself in different forms such as mental blocks and even perfectionism, which can be distracting from your overall goal. So our fear of failure can either catapult us or stop us dead in our tracks. Most of us probably fall somewhere in the middle, where somewhere just kind of depending on where we failed ourselves, but we can often bounce back from minor failures, and how we react to failures that are tied to our long-term goals is how we can determine our courage. Maybe the first time we sat for the CDM exam, we failed. But my guess is the next time you sat for the exam, you had learned from your mistakes or the missed questions, and you passed the exam, and that's why you're here with us today. Maybe you interviewed for a job and it didn't pan out. Perhaps you were able to refine your interview skills a bit more with the next interview. That all took courage. We were afraid of failure prior to these experiences, and maybe it took us a while to pick ourselves up and brush ourselves off, but most importantly is that after our failures, we gather our courage and we try again. So, anyone willing to provide an example of overcoming failure, or, you know, what motivated you to gather your courage and try again? Anybody like to share an experience like that? Anyone? No takers out there? I know we have some people on the call. And again, feel free to use the chat function, and I can read it anonymously if you like. Okay. Well, next on to conscientiousness. Some of you may know there are 638 primary personality traits. I didn't know this until I was researching some material for the program. However, of these, there are 5 that are the big traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neurotic. Each trait is on a scale with its opposite on the other end, and our personalities are the expression of the interaction of each and all at any given time. So all 5 of these traits, plus these secondary traits, are this expression at any given time. For instance, you might feel more agreeable. The next minute, you might feel more neurotic. However, day to day, these traits, they tend to remain fairly stable. And of these 5 traits, Ms. Duckworth believes that conscientiousness is most closely aligned with grit. And it's thought there is not just one way to define conscientiousness. However, conscientiousness in this case is drive. Thoroughness to not only follow through and complete the project or goal, but to do your best while in the process. Conscientious people tend to be organized and efficient. This trait doesn't always come naturally to all of us, but it is necessary to support our long-term goals. Being conscientious allows us to carefully think about the steps we take towards achieving our goal and ensure that they ultimately support our long-term goal. So everything that we're doing to achieve that long-term goal. Again, if we're sitting for the CDN exam, we're studying, we're using flashcards, maybe we're joining a study group or reaching out to our mentor. We're all very conscious about what we're doing, and we're doing that with purpose. Additionally, these steps we are taking, or the planning or the organizing that goes into our long-term goals, also makes us accountable to ourselves. When we invest the time and hold ourselves to a standard, the payoff is that much sweeter in the end. So to best summarize this grit trait, to commit to winning the gold medal, you must do more than show up to practice. So yeah, we want to win the gold medal. Great, I'm going to go out and win the gold medal. Well, that's great. You can show up to practice all you want, but are you really going to put in the effort that's needed to win that gold medal? That's what really conscientiousness is about. We're paying particular special attention to what we're doing to meeting our long-term goals and persevering. Any questions about this? Any tips that anybody would like to share? This is a tough one. You know, not everybody is naturally conscientious, so it does take some practice and getting used to and thoughtfulness behind this step. All right, so the next trait related to grit is endurance. To endure or to persevere is to make it through difficulties or challenges and continue after failure. I believe this trait and courage really go hand in hand. Courage can be used as a support to your endurance and resiliency. The most common way to build endurance is to practice. Think of your current position or your most recent position as practice to build your endurance, your professional endurance, if you will. Each day we are practicing for our next position, whether it comes next week or 3 years from now. Sure, some of our work can be routine and monotonous, but we're practicing the skills that we need to become second nature to us, and that will eventually help us achieve our long-term goals. So now you may be in a position where you're doing something routinely, it's becoming second nature. That's great, because when you do move up to the next level in your career or the next position, the person behind you or your successor is going to be coming to you and asking you questions, and you're going to be the expert. So that practice is really helping you reach that long-term goal. Additionally, we're putting in practice now that builds our endurance that we're going to need for later, but knowing it brings us one step closer to our goals. So we see how that kind of works, kind of comes full circle. Yet it's not just the time that we're putting in, but it's the purpose behind it. And this kind of ties back to being conscientious. Sure, we can go about our day-to-day work without giving it much thought, but what about the learning opportunities that we can practice regularly? Like working or managing people provides the opportunity to learn from each unique situation. So for instance, you may handle similar personnel issues differently, but you're practicing working with different personalities, with our jobs, or even as chapter leaders, which I know we experience from time to time. Another example, if you're working to improve procedures to make your department or perhaps your chapter business management more efficient, these are both ways to practice. It is a non-conventional way, but it will make you a better manager or chapter leader, as well as helping you work towards achieving your goals. When we put thought and purpose behind our responsibilities and duties, we are practicing with purpose, and we are essentially building that endurance. So again, I want to pause here. I'd like somebody to tell me about a certain situation where you practice within your role. Maybe it's a day-to-day thing you do. Maybe you do it bi-weekly. Maybe you do it quarterly. Something that you started when you took on your new position or this current position that you're in that you weren't familiar with, but you've built on that, and now it's really second nature. Can anyone give me an example out there? Or maybe something to do with chapters. That would be even better. I do get calls from chapter leaders. You know, a lot of times they're new. Sometimes they're thrown into positions. They don't have any guidance. The person before them has long gone. You know, they've left them no further instructions. And a lot of times I'll speak with this person or these people, these chapter leaders, you know, in June, oftentimes when we're taking on new roles or new people are taking office, and they have a zillion questions and they're very unsure about themselves in this role. But they find the more that they, you know, are documenting minutes, or they're sending out president's messages, or they're communicating with their board members, I find that I'm not getting these same kinds of phone calls and questions from people 6 months down the line. And that's because they're practicing. The more they do it, they are building those skills and they are building their endurance. So that might be a good example for you to think of when you are going about the day-to-day stuff or the month-to-month chapter leader business, that you are essentially practicing and you're building up that endurance for the next big thing. Next is resilience. Resilient people that are resilient tend to be more optimistic, and they approach life with a sense of humor, and they take tough situations and experiences, and they often see the silver lining. Resiliency requires a strong moral compass as well as beliefs that can't be easily shattered or swayed. Those that are resilient tend not to compare themselves to others, but rather measure their own success by what they've accomplished. They view challenges as learning opportunities and aren't necessarily afraid of those challenges. They don't spend a lot of time trying to control their lives, which can be hard for many of us. They tend to be self-aware and mindful, and they adapt to life's difficulties by adjusting their attitudes and outlooks, as well as their goals according to the situations they may face. So perhaps something comes up that you had wanted to do within your state. You wanted to get a certification, you wanted to get a degree that required you to be in your state for whatever reason. Maybe you had to go back to school and you were planning on going back to a school in your state. Turns out you've been transferred. Well, that goal is going to have to change. You're going to have to look for a new school or perhaps a different or equivalent certification in that state that you've been transferred to within your new facility, within the new state. So people that are resilient just kind of shrug their shoulders at the change and they move on and find a way to adapt. And in our case, maybe resiliency is something that we use every day. If we make an error, we'll own up to it, we correct it, we move on without even giving it another thought. This is exactly what resiliency is. Again, we're just kind of shrugging our shoulders, especially if it's not a big deal, and we move on. So when it comes to our long-term goals, it's about keeping our eye on the prize, not worrying about what others are doing, and being open to different paths to getting there. And I really believe that resiliency, like endurance, is both very similar to courage, or rather they go hand in hand, because it does take courage to be resilient. As for our long-term goals, resiliency is really the engine that keeps them in motion. It keeps us on the steady track to accomplish these goals as well. And last, but certainly not least, of the grit traits is excellence. Some of you may question why excellence over perfection. Well, for one, perfection is rigid and one-sided, while excellence tends to be adaptable, subjective, and varying. Perfection, as we discussed a little bit earlier, can also be a barrier. If we are constantly seeking perfectionism, we are avoiding what may or may not be failure, which eliminates our opportunity to use all other of our grit characteristics. This is because with perfectionism, we can get hung up on an idea or ideal of what others may expect from us, rather than what we expect and, more importantly, are capable of ourselves. It is also just one more barrier to our success of achieving our goals. Think about your long-term goal, the one we thought about earlier in the call. Now think about if every step that you took to achieve that goal had to be perfect. You would likely never achieve that goal. So always striving for excellence, focus on excellence, which is not so much a goal itself, but rather the attitude or the way we approach our work and something we can achieve each and every day. It allows us to continue to strive to work towards our goal, but also makes us aware of the quality of work we're putting towards it. Striving for excellence rather than perfection helps us build our endurance, makes us conscientious, and provides another reason to be courageous and resilient. Of all the pillars of grit, excellence may be the one that withstands most of the work or bears the brunt of it, but ultimately it helps to support all of those characteristics. And just on a quick side note, another trait that has been discussed when speaking of grit is passion. And passion can be thought of as a secondary trait, perhaps, in all of this. And it does help to support excellence that essentially helps to promote all of those grits, all of the grit traits. So some of you that are familiar with this topic, you may have seen, the characteristics of grit vary just depending on the author or perhaps the session that you took about it. But these are mainly the five that go hand in hand when we're referring to grit. All right. So any questions about anything that we've gone over here today so far? It is pretty straightforward in the sense of how we're describing it, but again, these are very subjective personality traits. Great. All right, so now what? We have our long-term goal in mind, we have our grit score, now we understand the characteristics and how do we interpret them with grit. How do we put this all together? Well, this is where we want to start to be mindful about these traits and how we use them every day within our professional lives, related to our work, or perhaps with our chapters, and in some cases our personal lives. So we're going to go ahead and circle back a little bit with courage. Remember, with courage, we aren't afraid of failure. And when we face adversity, we can pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and get back out there. But how do we improve or strengthen courage? We should think about courage as a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it becomes. We will make mistakes along our journey, but if we face our failures with courage, we are no longer afraid to fail. Eleanor Roosevelt really said it best. Do one thing that scares you every day. Now, I honestly can't say that I do that, but after learning more about this particular topic, it is something that I'm going to have to work on. But think about that. That does definitely give you something to think about and to strive for. So if we continually do something, even the things that may scare us the most or force us outside of our comfort zone, at the very least, we walk away knowing that we've tried something and we've strengthened that courage muscle, even on the smallest scale. But we'll likely end up learning something from it, even if it's not to do what we don't want to do the next time or how we may try a new way of doing something. So it really just depends on what it is. At the very least, we should take away from the whole experience is that you can look back and say, I tried that, and now I know, whatever it is that you happen to learn. Maybe it wasn't perfect, which isn't what we're striving for anyway, but we tried it, and now we can know we can try it again and we can persevere. One way to do this is to look for these opportunities at our jobs. Is there a new procedure you've been wanting to implement, but you've been unsure? The only way to know if it's going to work is just to give it a shot. Or perhaps your supervisor is looking for some additional help with a project or a task that you're not familiar with, that you'd like to help. Maybe it's a chapter position that you're a little bit hesitant to try, Be very forthcoming with either your superior or your other chapter leader that, hey, you know what, I'm not that familiar with this, of the details of the job or the task, but I'd like to try it and help regardless. Even if they say no, you've at least worked up the courage to put yourself out there and ask. And then you want to continue to do this. We need to work that courage muscle every day for it to become stronger. Next, conscientiousness, one of the big 5 personality traits, remember? We talked about how conscientiousness assists us in being organized and efficient, as well as mindful about the tasks at hand and those deliberate steps we take for each goal. We talked about being conscientious is doing the best we can with purpose. And when we are organized, because we are being purposeful, we tend to be more efficient, which in turn leads us or allows us to be more detail-oriented, as well as mindful about what we are doing. We're focused and we're more likely to follow through. So here we're going to take a step back from what we're trying to accomplish. You want to get yourself organized. We're thinking about this long-term goal right now that we thought of at the beginning of the call again. Again, I'm going to keep referencing this. Maybe it's something, you know, that you'd like to be more organized overall. So maybe you need to get your files created for everyday use. Maybe you need to write down a step-by-step action plan or a timeline for your long-time goal. It could be something big, it could be something small. What you need to do, though, is start with something simple. So, for example, I like to start with a to-do list each day I come into work. I review my to-do list each morning. Then at the end of the day, I cross off what I've accomplished. Then at the end of each week, I create a new list with everything I still have yet to finish, as well as what else I need to complete the following week. That way, when I come in Monday morning, I'm ready to act. I also prioritize my projects by what is time sensitive and what needs my attention first. And of course, you know, we don't need to live and die by these to-do lists or timelines. As sometimes we know things don't always go unplanned. There's situations that come up that need our immediate attention. However, if we do get off track, it's important that we have a way to get back on track, and organization really helps us do that. Before you do anything, maybe it's the start of your day, before you're having meetings with your staff, before you're having meetings with a team, start by taking a moment, take the time to get everything prepared before you have to jump into something. You'll be more efficient and conscientious with the task or the project or the meeting. Soon enough, you're going to see yourself follow through with that project on your way and on your way to the next thing, bringing you one step closer to accomplishing your goal. So this, I know, is not always the natural thing for everybody to be organized, but and it does take some practice. And again, there's going to be wrenches thrown into things, but I do feel strongly that you know, organization is the first key to really seeing that long-term goal and setting a path and how you're going to get there. So any questions about anything on how we're applying these traits and putting them into action? Any other questions? Okay. All right. And endurance. As we stated earlier, endurance is how we move on from failure, or how we persevere after we fail, because as we know, we will fail along the way, but how we're able to deal with it, and more importantly, how we move on from it and not let us hold us back, is how we endure. When we do this, we are practicing increasing our endurance, so it gets much easier each time. And when we are practicing, we want to be sure we are doing this with purpose. And when I say practicing, remember, I'm talking about the normal day-to-day stuff. That can be considered practicing. So are you coming in and, you know, is your desk a mess? Does it need to be straightened before you can get started with your day? Or is that something you need to do at the end of the day? So you walk in and everything is fresh and ready to go. Maybe it's your email. Some people walk in and have a zillion emails they need to go through. Oftentimes, a lot of people will answer what needs immediate attention and save the rest for later. Just kind of depends on how you can stay focused and, of course, the role your job and exactly, you know, what you need to prioritize. So all those things are considered practice. And when we do practice with purpose, our long-term goals become more clearly defined, and our practice then becomes more valuable. This is why it's really important for us to write down our long-term goals. Putting them down on paper makes them more real. It can also give us something to reference when we take these steps to reach our goals. Say, for instance, your long-term goal is to become a manager, director, or maybe the CEO within your facility or organization. Write down each step you'll need to take to get there. Then as you accomplish these steps you are taking to get there, you're going to see the progress you're making right before your eyes. So it kind of gives you a little bit of satisfaction. If you write this down and you can come back, you know, a week later, or 3 months later, a year later, and tick that off your list as one step closer to reaching that long-term goal. If you're really up for it, consider sharing your goals with someone. Perhaps it's a friend, your spouse, a colleague, or even a superior, depending on the nature of your relationship. Consider putting reminders on your calendar to make sure you're on track. I do this a lot with not only my professional life, my personal life. The things that I know I need to get done, whether they be long-term goals, you know, personally that I would like to attain, or if there's something related more to my professional life. I think they're a good way to write. When you write down your goals, you're definitely making yourself more accountable, and you're more likely to follow through then when it's staring you right there in the face. I certainly feel that way about my to-do list. When I walk in each day, there it is, waiting for me to get it done and tick it off my list. And back to resiliency or toughness. If you recall, resiliency is the engine that really keeps us in motion, while endurance is the spark of the ignition and helps us pick ourselves up. Resiliency really gets us moving forward. And optimism is one of those things that help us build resiliency. Optimism can carry us through so much in our lives. So now is as good a time as any to start looking on the brighter side. You know, maybe it was a rough year. Here we are at the end of the year. This is often a time we take to do some reflecting about what's happened, maybe within our jobs, within our personal life, with our children. You know, maybe worldwide we're reflecting on things. But now is the time to really, you know, no better time than now, I should say, is really to be looking on the brighter side of things. And I understand that this can be a big change of attitude and an undertaking for some people. Some of us just naturally tend to be pessimistic. But that doesn't mean we can't start being positive with things now. Perhaps start with those things that are associated with reaching our long-term goals, whatever that may be. If you're looking to get a good degree, consider yourself ahead of the curve where you are right now. Sure, you know, you may not have that degree yet. Maybe you're not even enrolled in school. Maybe the application isn't even done. But you've already had this hands-on experience as a CDM in your kitchen or your facility. You've had management experience, and many of those other students you may find that are coming right out of high school or otherwise, they don't even have anything close to that. So right there, you're already looking on that brighter side of your long-term goal of obtaining that degree, knowing that you're probably going to have firsthand knowledge that others will not. And that's benefit to you. If your goal is to get a promotion, you may already be poised in the position to do so at your next review. Or maybe you know what you need to accomplish to do that. Maybe you've had a chance to sit down with the person who would, you know, recommend you for a promotion. Maybe they've given you solid examples of what you need to do in order to reach that status. That would be even better, you know, rather than a guessing game of what you think you might need to be able to do. What are the steps you need to take in order to get that promotion? So if you have that opportunity with somebody at your job, and if that is your long-term goal, definitely work up that courage and go in there and have that frank conversation with them. Things like that. You know, some of these may seem insignificant or that, you know, we're splitting hairs, but that's not necessarily the point. The point is that we take what we already have in front of us. We see what good has already come of it, and then we start to look at the future in this light as well. Again, this all relates back to resiliency and that it's going to help us be more resilient when failure does hit. And those that are resilient, again, they tend to be optimistic, but they also have a very strong sense of character. Like optimism, this is something we can build. It means that we do not falter in our beliefs or morals, and we show integrity with all that we do. This is also something we can begin to practice right now. It's okay, we might be further behind some of our peers in terms of where we are in our careers, but what we need to do is focus on is the work we are doing now and measure our own success as we achieve it. This is another reason why we should be writing down our long-term goals. So if you don't already, begin to focus in on your own work or your team's work, particularly the work that supports your long-term goals. Be your own measure of success and accomplishment. Do you have an annual performance review? If you do, this is a great benchmark to determine how far you've come within the last year or how much farther you need to go. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing, as you're the only one that can reach that goal. No one else is going to be able to reach that goal or accomplish that goal for you. So why bother worrying about what others are doing? That right there is a strong sense of character and having that integrity about everything that you do in order to reach that goal or be part of your goals. Both characteristics, the optimism and the integrity, the optimism, the strong sense of character, both of these characteristics really require you to be self-aware. And this too, you know what I'm going to say, will take some practice. Definitely something that you can practice now. And this one is tough. This one doesn't come natural to a lot of people, myself included, but consider some mindfulness exercises or even meditations. Once you start these, you're going to be amazed how many times your mind wanders in the first few times you do it and how little you might be able to focus. But by practicing these exercises, you'll truly become thinking in the moment. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Pomodoro technique. This is a technique where you set allotted amount of time to complete a task. Not even complete a task, to work on a task, let's say. I find this method to be very useful. Oftentimes, I'm sure everybody else experiences it. There are distractions. I'm getting phone calls. I see that little email icon pop up in my taskbar, and I immediately want to go and check it. But the Pomodoro method really helps me stay focused, even for, say, 10 minutes at a time if I need to, and helps me get the task ultimately completed. So essentially what you would do is take a timer, take one on your phone. If you have a kitchen timer, take 10 minutes and say that you're going to work on one project for that full 10 minutes. You're not going to check email. You're not going to check voicemail. I hate to say this, but maybe you don't take phone calls. You put your phone on Do Not Disturb for 10 minutes. I don't recommend that always. But you're taking that full 10 minutes and you're allotting that towards that specific task, and you're able to tackle that. You'd be really amazed how much you can actually get done, even in that short amount of time. Then, after those 10 minutes, maybe you check your email, maybe you check your voicemail, check in with your staff, then come back and do it again. Then, eventually, you want to build off of that. So you're taking 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a half an hour, and so forth. So I think that's a great method to really become more mindful about what we're doing. And I found when I first started using this method to be kind of a challenge. I didn't realize how easily distracted I could be, and how much longer it probably takes me to get some things done over others. Anyhow, these outlooks, the optimism, the resiliency, the optimism, the integrity, your self-awareness, these are, and the strong beliefs as well as the confidence in who we really are and what we strive for, these are all parts of building resiliency. Any questions so far? I think I saw one pop up here. Let me just take a quick look. Okay, so I do have a couple comments kind of going back to, oh, these are great. Okay, I apologize. I'm just seeing these. Going back to some practicing techniques that we have here. So here we have some people working on getting the chapter newsletter updated and sent out. Yes, that right there is a great example of practice. Because it is something routine, we have to do it regularly. This is a great method of practice. You have to be, you know, it's somewhat time sensitive depending on how you set that schedule. And if not, perhaps that's a great tool to make sure that we are practicing making that routine and getting it updated and sent out to your members on time. Here's another great comment we have. Someone decided to do weekly huddles with their employees. This is a fantastic tool to practice. You're not only touching base with your employees, and they probably feel as though they're getting some of your attention. You really understand more of what's going on with them or where they might need help. And because it's done weekly, it's regular, so you're practicing with purpose. I love these. These are great. Let's see what else we have. Yes, back to the to-do list. You know, this person agrees that to-do lists, whether they're daily or weekly or long-term, help to stay on track and focus through many of the interruptions each day. Yes, agreed, because there's something that feels so right at the end of the week when I get to tear up a new piece of paper and start my to-do list fresh. Really having a sense of accomplishment that I came to work this week and I really got a lot done. Somebody else said they use a calendar, which is great for them, and it helps their peers as well. So these are all wonderful techniques for practicing with purpose and reaching those long-term goals ultimately. So someone here says, my daily to-do is ongoing, and I just move things over that I don't accomplish that day to the top. Yes, see this, I mean, these are exactly what, you guys already have these techniques, but I want you, I guess, to be mindful and realize that what you're doing, this is all practice. This is all building that endurance up to something more. You're striving for that top prize, whatever your goal is. So these are all wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I apologize, I get a little off track there. But do we have any questions at this point or any other comments? And feel free to use that chat function. That's what it's there for. Thank you so much for those who contributed. All right, we'll keep here. And last, excellence. As we discussed, we should strive for excellence in our work, not perfection. Perfection will hold us back and continue to hold us back if we allow ourselves to be measured by unattainable expectations. It gives us no opportunity for growth, unlike excellence does. When we strive for excellence, we can still accomplish something using integrity and mindfulness. But really, the icing on the cake, we can look back and think about what we can do better next time. What can we change or improve to make the next time more organized and efficient? Do a self-evaluation of your own work. Maybe it's at the end of each day. Do you walk away from work feeling as though you have accomplished a lot or maybe made a difference in someone's day? Is it a day you can feel very proud of? What can you do better tomorrow? Think about specific projects or programs that maybe you're passionate about, and what can you do to ensure that you do your best? This is where you can check in with yourself on where you are with your long-term goals every now and then and evaluate what else you could be doing to accomplish those goals. And the excellence will definitely come naturally. So a lot of us do tend to get caught up in perfection, but it holds us back in so many ways. And I think, as we discussed earlier, excellence is really the main pillar in all of the characteristics of grit that we discussed today. You know, when we strive for excellence, we are constantly striving to do our best. And when we do our best and that's good enough, that's going to get us moving on. That's going to get us to follow through with these goals in the end. What it all really comes down to with grit, it's an attitude. It's a belief that you can accomplish anything if you stick with it and persevere. Grit is to believe in yourself unwaveringly, sheer determination to win, as well as a plan for success. It's not giving up or giving in, and it's putting your best into a project and into your life. So again, just to kind of give you a recap here of taking these traits and making them a little bit more tangible and how we work it within our professional lives, within our within our chapters as chapter leaders, or even with our personal lives. With courage, you know, we really need to flex that muscle. Try something new. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, do something that scares you every day. Hopefully you can accomplish this. Maybe it'll take some time to build up to that. I know for me, that's certainly something I need to continue to work on. But it's always something to keep, you know, at the very least in the back of your mind, is trying something new. You know, remember, organization means efficiency. When we're organized, we've taken the time to prepare. We come into a clean desk, we have our to-do list ready. That already sets us up for a more efficient day, at least in my case. Hopefully it would do the same for you as well. Take time to write down those goals, make yourself accountable. You definitely make yourself accountable when you express those long-term goals to other people. You know, oftentimes, depending on who they are, they'll check in with you. I know that I've shared one of my long-term goals with a very dear friend of mine, with my direct boss, as well as the CEO. So now I feel more than ever that I need to be accountable to that long-term goal. It's definitely put some pressure on me that I need to move forward with it. So if you don't want to tell somebody, at least write them down, put them in a safe, you know, personal spot, and check in with them every now and then. Remember to look on the bright side. Keep the focus on yourself. Don't worry what's going on about others around you. You know, don't necessarily view them as competition, because they aren't ultimately going to help you achieve your goal. You are the one who's going to be the one that achieves that goal in the end. And remember to strive for excellence, not perfection. Perfection keeps us in a box. It's rigid, it's unforgiving, whereas excellence, we can take that opportunity and often learn from that experience. And overall, grit is really the attitude and the overall belief in yourself. So, any questions about how we can strengthen these traits, how we can relate them to grit, or anything else that that you would like to share? Yes, I have a great comment in here. Not practice makes perfect, but practice makes permanent. Yes, that is very true. You know, like we discussed earlier with practicing, maybe we are shooting off emails right when we come in. Maybe we're having that weekly huddle with our staff, or the one-on-ones with our staff. This is all practice, and the more we do it, the more regular it becomes. Yeah, it's gonna be permanent. So then when you do move on to that next goal, or perhaps that next position, that has already been instilled and in place. Great, it's a great comment. Anybody else? Questions, comments, anything you'd like to share? No? Okay. I do hope that everybody was able to hear the video. If not, I am going to be sending out the link to the TED Talk. You know, I certainly tried to explain this topic as best I could, but really, Angela Lee Duckworth, she's really the expert on this, and I would encourage you to check out her website as well, and I'd be happy to share that with everyone also. So that's the end of this part of the program, but just a few reminders. We do have our rebate deadline coming up January 15th. You know, that's only about 6 weeks away, and with the holidays, things tend to get crazy. So just as a reminder, chapter bylaws, policies, and procedures are due on the 15th, as well as the biannual chapter report, formerly known as the State Achievement Award, and that's part 2. We're also looking for the leadership succession plan, or outline, by January 15th as well. And then, of course, one of the new requirements we have is that we're asking for each chapter to submit at least one ACE award, and that is due by February 28th. All right, so our next chapter chat, we've just added a late-breaking chapter chat in January, and during that chat, which will be presented again by Barbara Thompson, we'll be reviewing the responsibilities of the chapter spokesperson, as well as provide best practices and other tips related to the role. So for those of you that are in that position or know another leader in that position, this is going to be a great refresher. This is going to take place on Tuesday, January 23rd at 2 o'clock Central Time, and we'll, of course, send out additional details in the coming weeks. If you have any questions following the program, please feel free to email me or give me a call. I'm happy to take those. But thank you all so much for joining us on the call today. Have a great afternoon and a wonderful holiday.